everyone to the Sister Stories podcast. This podcast is aimed at marveling at God's sovereignty in each of our lives as women and at encouraging one another via our stories. My name is Sophie, and today I am joined by Bernadette. Hello.
Hi.
You are there.
I am here, yes.
Right. So to start off, could you tell us a little bit about who you are?
So my name is Bernadette. I am in my early 30s now. I am married to Chris, who is a recent elder at Cornerstone Church, and I work in marketing.
Great, thank you. So obviously we're going to talk a little bit about your journey with Christ and how that came to be and all of that. But first, can you tell us a little bit about your family background, how you were brought up?
Sure. So I originate, if you like, from South Africa. I was born in Johannesburg, and my whole family at one point lived out there, either in Zimbabwe or South Africa. Oh. So I spent the first 7 years of my life out there, and then because of my dad's job, he was offered a chance to come and work in London for a year with the company he was with at the time, and so my parents decided to take it and to come out here. So we lived in London for a year. My brother and I went to school, and then at the end of that year he was offered a chance to extend and to stay here permanently. Wow. And so Mum and Dad weighed up the options given the state of South Africa and just future prospects, I think. And they made the decision to leave permanently. And so we ended up here.
Wow, great. And we're very grateful to have you, obviously. How did you find the difference between South Africa and the UK?
There is loads of differences. I think, fortunately, I was at an age where I think you're fairly resilient as a child, and you adapt very quickly to new situations. Yeah. So it wasn't sort of a massive deal in my head, just because, that's what was happening and off we go. I think for my parents, it was a lot harder. Mm-hmm. I know my mum really, really struggled with loneliness, being isolated from her family. Mm-hmm. They were so far away. And so, yeah, for them, it was a lot more intense, a lot harder. But for us, it was just, okay, you're starting a new school. Everyone sounds weird. And they do things a bit differently here. They call tea lunch and all sorts of strange things.
That confused me as well.
So, there was all of those little things that were different. But, we made the most of it as a family. I think we saw every single tourist exhibit there was to see in London at the time, plus every ruined abbey and castle there was in England. Oh. So they were soaking up the history. So it was good. It was challenging, I think, for the family. We got very used to it was just us four.
I see, yeah. So and quite a close
knit. Very close knit. We had relatives here too, but they're a little bit further away. So I grew up without grandparents, or I knew they were there, just very far away, but without the concept of a grandparent in your life. Same with uncles and aunts, not really there. Yeah. So it was just us four, and we just got on with things.
Wow, nice. And so I wonder what your background with in terms of church and your faith or your family's faith was like. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I've been very blessed to have been born into a Christian home. Both my parents were Christians and are Christians.
Let's not kill them yet.
No. Yes, but I think...
Sorry, parents.
But I think their understanding of all sorts of things, and their faith has grown since coming here. The biggest thing that they found is they weren't getting good teaching where we were in South Africa. They arrived here and it's all God's hand, because he brought them into a church that explained the Bible, taught actually what was in there. And so they grew with that. And as a result, my brother and I, we got more and more of Bible truths as we grew up. So I remember Bible studies with Dad. He taught us to say all the books of the Bible, memory verses as well. We used to do as a family. So yeah, we brought up in a Christian home, and fortunately in a place where we were well taught as well.
That's great. And yeah, as you said, God's providence to bring you to a place where you could learn accurate truths and really grow.
Yeah.
And so how can you describe for us whether you accepted those truths quite early on, or what was your response to what you heard?
So when I was when you grow up in that environment, you don't question to begin with. You know that there's a God, you know who Jesus is. You have some concept of the fact that you're not what you're supposed to be. You're not what you're created originally for. There's something missing. And Jesus is the way back to having a relationship with God. So you've got those early concepts. So I remember at one point, it was some family Bible study that Mum and Dad was saying, you don't have to be in a special place to pray. You can pray anywhere. So why don't you go and pray where you want? So I sort of went and hid and prayed. And that was just sort of, it's just a very childlike understanding of I can talk to God. So you don't question it. Yeah. And then when you are brought up in a Christian home, the church that you go to hopefully has peers your own age. And so everyone is in the same boat as you. And so you believe and you learn. And because everyone else is doing that too, you have a very good understanding that what you're being taught and what you believe and what your family believe is very different to your friends at school.
Yes,
there is a divide, not like it's a them and us sort of type thing, but you know that it's different. Yeah. And you don't question it, and I think the questioning only happens later on. As you get older and you go, hang on a second.
So can you tell us for you specifically how that happens? I think so. You seem to accept these truths quite early on, as you said, as a child would accept what they see around them as true, really. But was there a time of questioning for you later on?
Yeah. So I became a Christian in my early teens. I was probably about 13, 14. I can't really put a date on it, but I know it was on a Sunday evening. And it was because I had been under a preaching, and it was a little bit of a shock to me. He was preaching on judgment and on heaven and hell. And for the first time, I think the reality of that was very strong. It just sort of hit me in the face. And I realized for the first time that I couldn't, there was no guarantee of where I was going. And so that night I prayed, and I think I stayed up all night because I was just terrified, but knew that I needed to have Jesus as my savior. So that happened. And early in my teens, but as you go on, especially when there isn't a massive change because you're in an environment where you've not had a chance really to properly kick out against anything. So there isn't a stark contrast to watch for. And so the questioning came later in my late teens and early 20s, where I suddenly actually stood back and going, do I actually believe that? I became quite apathetic because it's week in, week out, you're hearing the same stuff, nothing's changed. You kind of expect this bolt of lightning.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and so you become apathetic. It becomes boring. You're not quite sure. You're like, are Mum and Dad mad? Church is weird. you know, and so for me that's when it started to be questioned.
Wow. And I wonder what so you were saying how you perceived the outside world to be different. What was your relationship with kids at school or people around you? Did you have good relationships with them, or did you really feel that difference in your behaviors?
Yeah, I really felt that difference. I knew that my upbringing was different. I, especially, you know, during your teenage times, it was very obvious that I didn't do the stuff that my peers were doing. And the funny thing is, I didn't really have any desire to. It's quite odd. It's sort of, I was not one of those girls who was, almost I couldn't be bothered. It was sort of just, it didn't really appear on my radar. I had no interest. And that in itself is a bit strange, I guess. But I was quite happy. I was quite happy and content that I just didn't do what other people did, and that was fine. But I was very aware that how I lived and how I spent my time was different to the girls around me. I did have good friendships, good relationships, but there was always a stop
as to how much you could do with them, I guess.
Yes. And so it was very much over there.
Yeah.
That's, you know, I'm friends with you, but the line is here.
Yeah.
And that's where we differ.
And I wonder, as you grew older, whether that changed a little bit, or maybe you wanted to relate to these people a little bit more, and that caused you to rebel, inverted commas, obviously.
Yes, I suppose so. I think I definitely started to think that their lives were easier. Mine was more boring. And they seemed to be having a lot more fun. They were just a bit more together, and I think I thought that they were happier than me. Alongside that, it wasn't just a outward looking at the world, but I was also very, very unhappy at church.
I see.
That was the other thing. So there was a lot of stuff going on. I think when you grow up in a church, sometimes you can become part of a culture within a church that's not healthy. And people think the same way, do the same thing, and it can become quite toxic. And so I think my apathy, my frustration grew within that. You know, also I thought all the Christian boys were idiots.
That doesn't help.
No, it doesn't help, and a bit weird and just not normal. And so I just got more and more uncomfortable, and more, I think, miserable is probably the way to describe it. So it was twofold. It was looking outward at something that I didn't have and I thought I wanted, and then also a really unhelpful culture. And that's not a reflection on the teaching. It was the people inside that were causing that.
I see.
So yes, those two things combined made me it made me question, you know, what's the point of this anyway? Is Jesus really who he says he is? And so I sort of grew very cold.
I see. Do you think that might be also caused by maybe the church not addressing the culture as much as it could have, or
yes, potentially,
or not equipping you to deal with the culture?
Yes, and I think there was also there was a lack. I think when I reflect back on it, it was also that the some people weren't putting into practice what they were hearing, really. And so you got, you kind of had, there was quite a lot of inward inward facing stuff. And I mean, I was fully culpable within that, but I started to feel very, very unhappy and uncomfortable within that. So yeah, I think there was quite a few things that they could have done, but it's very easy to point fingers, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm sure we're all guilty of doing that, and it's easy when you're in the community to look at people who are like you actually, and not really want to go outwards so much. And I think that's for everyone really. That's what everyone does.
Yeah.
Okay. And I wonder from that point onwards, what brought you back to church or brought you back to Christ really, and if there was something in particular that did that.
It's a little bit of a funny story actually. So I was at that point I was very unhappy. I was just questioning everything. At the same time, it was late teens, early 20s. My dad lost his job, and that was quite a pivotal point for the whole family, because he was mum didn't work at that point. Although she's a qualified teacher, she was fine getting work, but it was at that point she didn't. Everything was kind of riding on dad, and so he suffered enormously from that. It really, really affected the whole family. So I had, obviously, my trust and my foundation was in the wrong place, because it was on money and material things, and that there was an assumption that would just be there, and that wouldn't let me down. And then the rug completely got pulled out from under my feet with that. So that was a very, very good thing. But that just chucked everything up in the air for me. I questioned everything. So you've got this build up of unhappiness, frustration, starting to question it. And then this happens and you're like, what is going on? And so actually, at that point, I bumped into a guy who was a bit weird. He said he was a Christian though, but he was, he didn't go to a church.
I see. Yeah.
And at that point, I was in my head. I was like, "Well, I'm not going to church. I'm not going to church. I'm not claiming to be a Christian at this point. But I know that if you are a Christian, you should be connected to a church." So I kind of was like, "Well, if you say you're a Christian, you need to go to church, don't you?" Yeah. And so I ended up looking for churches for him, and that's when I found Cornerstone online and in Kingston, and I was like, okay, that's quite nearby. I mean, this person was up the other side of the country, so I never sort of suggested he go to Cornerstone Kingston, but it was through that I got to find Cornerstone, and I also knew that I needed to settle the question for myself of, is Jesus who he says he is? Is this based on solid factual evidence? Can I trust it? Because at the moment I don't think I can trust anything, and I can't trust anyone. People let you down. People are always going to do something to you. So what do you do? And so I was quite determined to find the answer and go, right, I just need to, it's either yes or no, and then I can move on with things. So that's how and God brought me to that place, because I think I get to a point where I get irritated and I just need to, sort something out. So that's part of my character.
Yeah.
So I started listening to sermons online at Cornerstone, and it was actually Andy Bruins who was preaching. And he was preaching a series on Job and suffering. And I was just really affected by them. I can't even remember exactly what he was saying, but I do remember God speaking to me through that. And so I paid attention, and at the same time I was also reading quite a lot, and so I absolutely love this book. And if anybody is going, well, I really need to know the facts, I can't trust this without facts, I read Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ, and that was super helpful, because here was a guy who was quite belligerent and sort of you know, he's quite cutthroat, and he would go for the jugular, and he wouldn't shy away from hard questions. And so I really connected with that, and it's like, great, someone's actually going to go and lay out all the evidence for me. And so that was quite pivotal for me. And I got to the end of that, combined with the preaching online, and then actually walking into Cornerstone and hearing the preaching through that. Pete was preaching at that point, and he just made it so clear and obvious that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. There is nothing else that you can put your trust in. And it was through those series of events that I ended up sitting in Beedlesford going, okay, I do believe this. I am actually a Christian. This is right. This is true. Fantastic.
Yeah. It's quite interesting how sometimes, I mean, we need a time of dissatisfaction, don't we, to come back and to realize, and that can come in many different ways, I'm sure, but yeah, to come back to God and to realize actually that this is true and this is what is foundational for us. And that's really amazing in your story to see that dissatisfaction and with your dad's job loss as well, and all of that being put into question, really. And God bringing you back to him.
Yes.
So yeah, that's amazing. So that's a really interesting way of finding Cornerstone for someone else, really.
Yeah, I don't normally say that, but that is how it happened. So.
That's interesting. And so obviously these couple of years have been a little bit strange for all of us. And I wonder what lessons you've drawn from these years, and if how God has challenged you or corrected you maybe, or taught you things.
Yeah, the past 18 months now, isn't it, has been, it's been really tricky. Again, in a way, the rug has been pulled out from under our feet. And we've had to make decisions about what we're going to do as a church, and we had to adapt very, very quickly to how things were going on. So I think for me, God really put back into focus. Okay, what is this? What are you really all about? What are you going to put your trust in? What are you going to cling on to now? When, again, the framework and what you know and what you're comfortable with is not there anymore. Where else is there to go but back to me? And trust me, I've got this. And that's difficult. I mean, that's hard. That really pushes people, and it pushed me. But once, and we have to keep reminding ourselves, we have to keep going back to the Bible. We have to, I mean, if we believe that this is God's word to us, this is a living word, it's God breathed and it's true, then this is where we go for answers and for encouragement and for correction. And so you have to go back there and you have to go to him. And so I think it's just highlighted the fact that he's definitely in control. Although crazy things may happen, you have to trust him. There's nowhere else to trust because nothing else is certain. I mean, and we've seen that with the pandemic. Things change week on week. You know, what about the rules that said you can't do this, but you can do this? And now it's, you know, it's just all over the place.
I've lost track.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it was very interesting because it called into question where is your trust? Yes, so that's what's really been coming up for me. But when you do go, okay, Lord, I am not in control. I'm not even in control of my own little life, let alone what's happening on a global scale. There's a burden that gets released, isn't it? I mean, you don't have to worry. Yes, you do worry. Everyone worries, but we're told in the Bible not to worry. And so you have to keep going, okay, God's telling me not to worry, to trust him. Okay, Lord, help me get through today. Just very basically, this is what I know I need to figure out. Help me do that. Help me get out of bed.
Yes.
Help me be in the right frame of mind so I can jump on Zoom, or I can sit there and concentrate and listen and watch the church service that's going on today.
Yeah.
And be an encouragement to others. I think the other thing about this whole period has been our natural tendency is to look inward and to look at ourselves and to worry about us and to, it's me, and what am I going to do now? And actually this has gone, to me, this has been very much, okay, well, acknowledging that you're not at the center, and to repent of that, actually. And it's not, I'm not standing here saying, oh yeah, I've done that and it's all good now. But that's been the challenge, and how we can be an encouragement to others and how we can support others and stop obsessing about ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, it's funny because the day I became a Christian, someone put it that way, which was, he was saying that we need to have basically we need to put the sun at the center of our universe and not the earth, basically.
Yeah.
And so, and as a picture of putting God at the center, and that really struck me. I think that's the only thing I remember from that day, from what was preached, actually.
Hey, that's the most important thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I think actually that's a really good thought to end on, and a really good encouragement for all of us to go back to scripture and listen actively to sermons and to really try to apply that to our lives, and as you said, to put God at the center and rely on him as the first and only person who can do anything. It's
coming to him with the small things. I mean, there's been multiple occasions over this year that Chris and I have been talking, and it's like, well, we need to pray about that. And it's not even the big things.
Yeah.
We need to come to the Lord for the little things as well. And it sounds, it's not. We're not belittling God in that way. We need to ask him for all sorts of things, but it's having that childlike reliance on him and talking to him. He wants to know. He knows already, but it's like a little kid. They come running to their parents and show the picture that they've drawn, or look, I found this stick, the parent knows,
to be a stick, right?
yeah, or something like that. But it's having that reliance on him and talking to him and having that relationship along with reading his word. It's life changing.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Bernadette, for sharing your story with us. So that's all for this episode of Sister Stories, everyone, but join us again next time.